Welcome pilots to another Jetworks build video. This one will be building the Drake III. Craig's had 3 attempts, if not more, building the pusher prop version. I'm sure he's learnt lots by it. Tobias has tested and flown the Drake EDF version, and this is what I'll be building. So it'll be interesting to see how many trees I can avoid with it. So usual glues I'm using is Yoo-Hoo Pour, 5-minute epoxy and 30-minute epoxy. First step is fitting the wing together and installing the carbon spars. A 6mm carbon tube I'm using, and a 6x1mm carbon spar. So as you can see, the wing comes in two splits. I'm just taping up the slots for the carbon spars, trimming off the excess, and then fitting them together. A wee bit of tape just to hold it in place to make sure it doesn't slide a bit or go off alignment, and then just down the centre apply a piece of tape as well. Carefully remove the additional foam where you're about to put the carbon fibre slots in. Once you're happy that it's all lined up, just using a wee bit of Yoo-Hoo Pour just along the edges, and just there I'm saving a wee space where the EDF mount is due to be fitted. Scrape away any of the excess glue and then just leave it to set. So here we're taping off the spars just so that the excess glue will be nice and clean and won't have a big spillage over the wing plate itself. Now the build does call for using epoxy and micro balloons along a lot of the joins. Obviously, if your intention is to fly in the water, then it will certainly help seal it. However, I'm using Yoo-Hoo Pour just to put it all together. I will hit the water at some point, whether that be nose first or actually trying to fly it in the water. But my intention is to fiberglass the hull and use some water-based varnish to seal it off, and then obviously some water-based acrylic paints. That'll help seal it as well. But just be mindful that I'm using Yoo-Hoo Pour here, and the build guide does call for epoxy. So here I'm mixing up, I'm sure it was 30-minute epoxy I used this time, just to give me enough, allow enough time to make sure that it's, goes in and the slots are in place, and I'm not having the glue going off me before I'm ready to accept that it's ready. So I've mixed up the glue, I've added some micro balloons, and again just putting it into the slot where the spar is, teasing out the glue to the edges of the wing plate just to avoid any gaps in the glue itself when it sets. As you can see, it's quite messy here. The thing is, with the micro balloons, epoxy can be quite runny, quite smooth, but when you add the micro balloons, it thickens it up a bit. So here I'm just forcing the epoxy into the slot for the 1mm spar. Obviously there's not a big space there, and then in with the 6mm slot itself. Got a couple of batteries just on the wingtips, just to make sure the whole flying surface is as flat as possible, flat to the build plate, and then just removing the excess tape where I've got all the spillages of epoxy sitting on it. Wee battery in place just in the middle, and allow it to cure. And then just carefully removing the excess tape. And there was a good finish. There was a couple of wee spots there where I hadn't teased it out enough, but that'll be fine. I think one spot's held, will be visible on the wing plate, but the other spot will be covered by the fuselage itself. And here, in true Fleming fashion, I've forgot to cut the rudder hole for the rudder itself. So just using the plans, just lining it up and cutting out that circle. So the next step, I'm going to be fitting the 3D printed hinges so that the wing plate's all done before I move along to, you know, the other parts. And if the hull and everything's built, sometimes it can be hard to, or it's easier doing it this way for myself. So just taping off the underside, lining up the 3D printed hinges, and just make sure the location pins that you have one in the reverse angle from the other ones, and in that way it locks it into place. It doesn't just slide off in one direction. So here I'm actually using 5-minute epoxy and just teasing a small amount into the outer edges so that it's leaving the centre nice and free for movement and things. Once that's set and cured, just carefully remove the additional tape that we have on it. And it worked out pretty well, it really did. See here, I'm just trimming up just a small relief from the ailerons itself. I usually do it this way so that when I cut the ailerons, it's nice and tight to the wing plate itself. Insert whatever control hinges it is you're using, and then just trim it away, and in that way you get a lovely finish. So the next step's the upper hull former in the wing and attaching the battery trays. So here we've got the upper hull former, and you just use the wing plate itself as a reference. Here I'm using a wee pen and just marking up so I can see where it is I'm about to put the glue, just so that I don't go over it. I would suggest that on the former there itself, you mark the centre line. I just guessed it and got it as close to it as possible, but yeah, I would suggest that you follow the guide properly. Use this video as just a wee reference if you choose to build a Drake, but it lines up pretty well. And I was just teasing the rear part into position. Just realigning it, make sure I'm happy with it, and then just the tail piece there. Like I say, if you mark it off, so mark a centre line, then you know you're going to get it fitting absolutely true. Again, just teasing it out to make sure it's nice and square, and then just allow it to dry. So here's a battery tray. I've trimmed as per the plans itself. The build guide shows larger angles and things on the battery tray, and I was a wee bit unsure of it, but when you cut as per the plans, it actually works out pretty well. So you're just applying a small amount of glue to the contact surfaces where they're going to meet. And it was a really nice fit. Just put that in a position, and just allow the glue to dry. So the next step is fitting the bulkheads onto the battery box, and for some reason I've missed it, but bulkhead 4, bulkhead 3 is in place there. As you can see, I've got a couple of wee modelling pins on bulkhead 3 at the front just to hold it in place, as there's it's very small contact surfaces. And then just applying some glue around the battery box itself, and then slotting it in from the underside of the wing. And as the wing, as you can see there's a lot of the weight sits at the back. Obviously the battery box connects to the front, so I just use a couple of modelling pins just to hold it in place, just to make sure that it doesn't ease off. And I actually put an old EDF box underneath it just to balance it out. So the next step was a wee bit tricky for me. 5, 6 and 7 bulkheads I've already fitted bulkhead 1 to it, and there's 6 and 7 that I'm putting in place. And then I noticed there was another slot there, and it kind of confused me because I wasn't sure where it actually went. So since the initial design from Craig, with the testing and the flying that he did himself, and obviously Tobias with the EDF version, fit 6 and 7, that was fine. And it came to number 5. The design itself and the templates have been adjusted to allow a longer front hull. There, bulkhead number 5 is actually moved back apart and back a piece. 6 is in place, but that additional slot is for 5. So what I've done, obviously spoke to Craig about this at the time while I was building it, because I was just it pickled me. I was thinking, I've certainly done something wrong. So what I did was bulkhead 5, that one there that we just have, I took 5A, I sliced that tab off the bottom and put it against bulkhead 4 on the battery box, so it was nice and firm. Then I put in bulkhead number 5 on the back of it also, and then just carried on with the rest of the build as per the guide. And now that I remember and think about it, I'll actually be repeating myself later on in the video, so apologies for that. So it's now time to move on to the next step, which is the aft longitude bulkhead and corner reinforcers. Quite simple with the aft bulkhead. There's a wee bit of trimming to do to take it down to the 4mm. So in the slot, just apply the small amount of Yoo-hoo, put it into place and let it set. And then the aft corner reinforcers. So again, just lining them up so that they're all the same shape. Apply a small bead of glue onto one of them. Squeeze 2 of them together and you get a very, very thin layer, and then add it to the other ones. And here I'm just trimming up. I actually made a massive mistake here, pilots, when it came to the trimming at the back. Again, as per the build guides, I do stress that you use the build guides. Don't just go with these crazy videos that I'm doing, because my build style is a bit erratic at times. Sometimes I don't even follow the build guide. But at the back there, where you cut the angle, just make sure you sand it as per the guide. I just got carried away and excited and ended up cutting too much off it. You can see a bit of a gap there. And when you squeeze it together, yeah, it was good. It looked good there, but when you offer it up to the hull, slot it into place over the bulkheads, you see it opens up there. So again, pilots, just make sure you follow the build guides that Craig spends enough time to do, and obviously the guides are there for a specific reason. I just do the videos to possibly help visually along the way, and yes, I do make some mistakes, especially when I'm flying. However, back to the video. So here, as you can see, I just teased it open there, just to try and get the right alignment that I was looking for. So the next step is the forward corner reinforcers. Now I'm sure on the guide there is only not the guide, sorry, the plans. There's only 2 reinforcers for it. Here's bulkhead 1. Quickly slot that into place. Just a small amount of glue. Just make sure it's in the right orientation. So yeah, the former reinforcers, it's asking for a mirrored pair. However, when you offer that up, it's short. So there's the 2 of them that the plans call for. Just cut 4. You'll need 4, 2 for both sides, unless I've got this dramatically wrong as well, but I don't think so. There's 2 that's needed for both sides, just like the rear corner reinforcers. So I was just testing the fit there before I decided to start gluing. Cut the additional 2 pieces, making sure they're all the same size, and then again a small bead of glue on one. Offer up the second one and give it a good squidge about so it's a very, very thin layer. Take that off and apply it to the next one. and the same with the other one. And then you're all using a very small amount of glue, but it works very well. So on the contact surfaces, just on the bulkheads there, just add some glue, whatever it is you choose to use, and then offer up the forward corner reinforcers. Again, just using a small modelling pin, just hold it into place. It may be beneficial to put a slight curve, well it probably is, and put a slight curve, form it over the end of the table, and that would certainly help if you're not using modelling pins or even a piece of tape. So there's just a wee spot of glue on bulkhead 1, just so that the end pieces are in contact. A couple of modelling pins just to hold it in place. And I lined up the 3D printed nose earlier just to make sure it was right. So the next step is the hull sides and the hull belly, and this is where the adjustments have been made. So at this point in the video, I'm going to pass you over to myself during the actual build process. Okay, so there's a bit of an update here. During the testing, Tobias and Craig, their development of the Drake, the plans has been adjusted. The step has been moved back to this slot. I was always kind of wondering what this slot was for throughout the build process. I knew it had something to do with the step and the bulkheads, but I just couldn't figure it out. Obviously I spoke to Craig about it, but when it comes to everything in the build is fantastic, all matches up great. However, before I moved on to the next step, I'm always thinking ahead. I tested out the side panel, and the side panel is just obviously not in the right place due to the step being moving back. Now Craig has updated the plans, however not all of it, and I think that's clearly due to building all these or designing all these amazing jets for us. So I've let Craig know he's obviously going to update things, but if anyone's building the Drake or intended to build it just now, this is how I've resolved it. So as I say, tested with the side panel. What I've done is bulkhead 5A and 5B. These are the parts that kind of confused things. So what I've done is I just cut out bulkhead 5A, but I've added a couple of slots to allow for the corner reinforcers. As I'm going to leave the step and everything in place, I'm just going to add an additional step. So cut this one out, bulkhead number 5A, and then I've also cut out bulkhead 5B with the tab that fits in the slot. But what I've done, I've lined up 5B and cut a couple of slots in there just for ease of fitting. So what the intention is, I'll whack some glue in there anyway because it's going to be needed for bulkhead 5. A wee strip along the back of 5E, A, B, C, D, whatever, 5A. So there's a wee bit of glue there. Then how am I going to do this? Joys of scratch building. Put that in there. In fact, what we'll do is just align a wee bit of glue there, a wee bit of glue there, and some inside. It'll probably get squished away with teasing it into place, but if I push it to the back first, right to the back, there we go. That one goes in there, so I'll just push that to the back just now. And then bulkhead number 5, we need a wee spot of glue in there. And there. Excuse the noise. Printers happily working away. So this one will take a wee bit of teasing. I think get it in the slot first. Yep. There we go, in the slot. That's in there. And then, so that's in position. Whack a wee bit of glue in there, just so that bulkhead 5, A and B stick together. Good old scrap piece of foam, just smudge it about. And then leave it left from there. And bin. And what we'll do is slide this into place. So that should give us the right dimensions or measurements for the step that's been adjusted. So just to check, here's the aft bulkhead. Yep, lines up pretty well. And the forward, belly forward from the nose. Yeah, that's pretty good. So a wee bit of mending on the plans and it'll be good to go. I think the reason behind it was it was doing wheelies on the water or something. However, it's resolved now, for my case anyway, and until the plans are updated, this should be fine. Let that dry before we move on to the next step. So apologies about the background noise and obviously repeating myself there. I had stuff on the go for the Eagle for the next build. So moving on to the next step is the canards, and here I'm using a 8mm carbon tube and a 6mm carbon tube also for the canards itself. So measured it out as per the plans, cut the carbon tubes and then just allow some epoxy. It was 5-minute epoxy that I put in here. Line them up. I think it was 2mm on the outer side of the wing plate and 4mm on the inside. So I've put in the two 8mm tubes and then inserted through the 6mm carbon tube on the inner tube, just to make sure that both sides are aligned up nice and straight and flush. And then an extra small amount of epoxy on the outside just to make sure that they're held nice and firmly in place. Just push it through and make sure I was quite happy with the alignment. It was nice and flat. Stop messing about, Barry. There we go. And then just allow it to dry. So the next step, attaching the hull sides and the belly forward. So like we were saying twice actually, the sides have been adjusted as per the plans that you'll be printing off. It's just the build guide itself, the steps on the guide, just to show the new location of bulkhead number 5, So just using a pen, I'd offered up the hull sides there, and a wee pen just to mark it. Predominantly at the front, just there, between the canards, just so that I know where I'm adding the glue, and just add some glue to the contact surfaces. You don't really need a pen, to be honest, because the sides are there and it's quite easy to see that they'll slide up. So offered it up and just smudged it about just to make sure there's glue along all the contact surface, and then using some modelling pins from the front, just tack it into place, because again there's a slight bend, slight curve, and just where the bulkheads are, and just offering up a wee modelling pin just to hold it into place there. And then do the same with the opposite side. I've actually got the Drake sitting on a couple of boxes, again just raising it off the table just to make sure that it's easier to work with rather than wobbling about in the build plate. So just like we did on the opposite side, just a small amount of glue along the contact surfaces, the corner reinforcers, offer up the side, and again just smudge it about to make sure that there's glue covering all areas. Obviously on the, like I said at the beginning, the build guide does ask that you use epoxy. Again, I will suggest that you do. Here I'm just using Yoo-hoo, but the epoxy with the micro balloons will help seal this part and make sure that water doesn't get into the hull if you choose to go out in a lake or a big puddle. So here on the back, again just contact surfaces, small amount of glue, and then offer it up and smudge it about. Just again make sure there's a nice even coating and I'm not missing any gaps. Again, hoping that it will certainly help that there's no water ingress. And here I'm just putting up a wee 3mm piece of foam, just slotting that in there just to hopefully plug any gaps. As I say, I'm going to be sealing it with fiberglass cloth and some water-based varnish, and then some paint over the top that should hopefully seal it. I'll predominantly be flying on from the grass, but yeah, I do intend to take it down the Forth, maybe fly it under the Forth Road bridges. So again, on the contact surfaces, we're just putting the front belly panel in place, and I'm using a good amount of Yoo-hoo. In most applications I would use a smaller amount, but like we're saying, with the chance of going into the water, I'm hoping that this kind of helps seal it up, this rubbery Yoo-hoo glue. Again, some modelling pins, just tacking it into place as there's a slight curve. And then moving on to the next step, which is the upper bulkheads and the magnet panel. So here we are with all the pieces laid out and the servo support tray as well. Quite simple, just a small amount of glue, offer it up to the slots, and just be aware of the positioning here of the bulkhead. I suppose it's quite simple, it'll only go in one direction unless you want the bulkhead to stick out the side. A wee bit of glue on the servo tray between that and the bulkheads, and there's bulkhead 3, there's 2 pieces for that. Small amount of glue and offer it up there as well. And then that takes us on to the rear panel and the magnet panel. Quite simple steps here. Small amount of glue on the contact surfaces, just offer them up, allow the glue to cure. And then it's the rear servo tray in upper bulkhead number 5. So I've marked it off here with a pen just to show where I'll be putting the glue. I don't want to get too much on the servo trays, and here I'm marking out the additional one for the rudder as I'm building the EDF version here. Again, you could use a centre line. I probably suggest using the centre line along these parts just to make sure that they're aligned and true. Offer them up and allow them to cure. Next step's the ducktail supports and the canopy support. Ducktail, I've already sanded it. In fact, I haven't, not in this one. Just a small amount of glue. There's a surprise, no having things sanded. Smudge it about, just make sure there's a nice amount of glue around it. A nice even contact. And then just offer it up into place. And I'm just using the rudder hinge itself just to make sure it's lined up. And then the canopy support pieces itself. These fit pretty well. Again, just on the contact surfaces of the bulkheads. A small amount of glue. And just on the ends there, just to make sure that it meets both sides. Again, small modelling pins, just tacking into places. There's just a wee gentle curve. Just like we did in the opposite side. Tack it in and hold it into place, and then allow that to cure. We one just on the rear, just so it doesn't slide out. Quite happy with that. So the next step is sorting out the canard servo, and then once you've done that, moving on to the bridge panel. So here I've got the servos in place, I've got the holes drilled out and stuff, and then working on the front, just getting a wee control rod, making sure it moves nice and freely. I've 3D printed a couple of end stops here. The plans does say that if you have some prop adapters, just drill them out. They work just as good. And I've also printed the control horn here. I think it was from the F15 this that I've the Tomcat F14, sorry. So printed that out with Z-bend, and then just mark it where it's due to go into the canard servo itself, and then do the opposite bend using the Z-bend pliers, trim it off, and then just line it up to the control arm. And once that's in place, that should work the canards very well. Obviously it's just in one rotation in the elevator movement, and here I'm just lining it up to make sure it's the rod is this equal length at both sides before I actually glue it into place. So a small amount of Yoo-hoo on the tray to hold the servo in place, and then just testing it. Yep, works pretty well. And then I'm going to use some 5-minute epoxy here. I'm just trimming out a wee bit of foam just for relief there, and then sliding the end stops into place and moving along the control rod to where I want it to be. Again, just checking it's even at both sides. Now I've got a wee bit of tape on one side there, just to hold it in place so it doesn't slide through at all. And I've got a wee bit of 5-minute epoxy there. I've added a touch of micro balloons in it, not much at all. Just be careful when you're adding epoxy at this point that you don't actually have it touching the tubes that go through the hull itself. And what I'm doing is I'm just offering up some glue to it, the epoxy, and twisting the rod just to make sure I've got it all the way around it, and then carefully on the end stops as well, and then just sliding them up to the 8mm tubes. Allow that to set once it's cured, and then moving on to the bridge panels. As you can see here, I've not actually cut it as per the plans. What I intend to do was just put that in place and then cut it the angles after it with a sharp blade, just so that it was nice and flush, because my cuttings know the best at times, especially pre-assembly. So once that's in place and it's ready, it's time to move on to the upper fuselage sides and then fit the nose cone itself. So very simple here. Just move your wires and stuff for the servos out the way. Offer up the sides, just as a wee test fit, just to see that I'm happy with it and I've not made any mistakes anywhere else. And again, along the contact surface, a small amount of glue, whatever it is you choose to use, and then some along the bulkheads as well. Just marking a pen just so that where I have to put glue on the hull itself, on the wing plate, then I know the glue is going to meet up to the sides. So obviously the front had a wee bit of air time there, and as you can see, we stuck it on. There's a slight curve, a wee bit of a bend, and it's held well. Obviously that's why it's called contact glue. If you allow it time to air when you've put it on and offered up both sides, when you actually go to apply it back, it sticks pretty well. And then it would remove the use of modelling pins mostly. So here I've got the elevon servos in place, and I'm just marking up where the rods are due to meet the servo arms. I've got my end stops, my linkage stoppers on the controls itself, and then pushed obviously the control rod through the wing itself there. Attach it to the servo, trim up any excess wire, and then do the same with the opposite sides. Just make sure you glue these servos into place pretty well. I actually used hot glue there just to secure them. The next step is the ESC support and the ducktail top. So the ESC support, the plan has for 2 6mm pieces. I've actually used 4 just to ensure that the servo's held, no the servo, sorry, my ESC is held pretty well and level. So here just using the template and just holding on to it in a rough cut on a scrap piece of foam. Get additional 2 pieces. There's probably no requirement for this. In fact, I'm pretty sure there is. That's why this is not on the plans. And I've just put it in there so that when I offer up the ESC, it's nice and firm, because obviously we'll be pressing down the top belly panel to get a marking of where we need to cut out. So here's a 3D printed nose, a wee bit of glue, offer it up so it's nice and tacky, and then put the nose cone on. Ducktail top, small amount of glue all around it. Good smudge about, and just on the contact surfaces there was a wee bit missing there. And then offered up the top itself. Put it in place and allow it to dry. So like I was saying, here we are with the ESC and attached the receiver. I've got my receiver in place. The servos are all working. And just getting the ESC into position. I've already kind of measured it up to see that the motor leads are long enough to fit to the EDF unit itself. And just putting it into position, and then we're just going to secure it down. There is a wee bit that I'm cutting out. There's obviously some wee circuit board. There was a bit of a bump on it. I'm making sure that the flat plate, the cooling part of the ESCs on the outer surface, it'd be pretty pointless if it wasn't, I think, in terms of cooling. So using a wee bit of hot glue just to secure it into place. And just tidying up moving away any excess glue, with a scrap piece of foam. And then just tidying up the wires just to make sure they're not getting in the way of the servos. Once that was set, just removing the belly, the top panel pieces, putting that into place, and then applying some pressure down onto the ESC to get some marking as to where it is that I need to cut it off. And we're cutting this out so that the cooling part of the ESC is on the outer surface, obviously to allow it to cool. I'm just trimming a wee bit of relief here for the wires. Again, when you're using a sharp blade like it's not guarded or anything, just be careful and mindful that it's a sharp blade that you've got in your hand. So moving on to the next step is the rudder bracket, the shaft and the rudder tube. Obviously I've 3D printed these here. Again, superb design skills by Craig. So Once I've got them printed, everything on this model is done in lightweight PLA, other than the aileron hinges there, because I'd already printed these off. So just with a small hobby file and a piece of sandpaper, just offering them up, and just making sure that we've got nice, smooth, free movement, and there's no friction between either. I was quite happy with that. And then just using again a small hobby drill just to cut the hole for a control end stop, sorry. Wee bit of Yoo-hoo porn, put that into place, and attaching the end stop onto the rudder shaft. Now I do the threads on it was a wee bit long. When I offered that up and put it into place, it was actually cutting into the foam while it was scraping against it. So I just used the hobby file and just pressed it down, just so there was a wee bit of groove, again a wee bit of relief, so that it was working fine and there was no friction between either. So on the rudder, here I'm using 5-minute epoxy with some micro balloons as well. Mix up the epoxy so it was nice and firm, and then added the micro balloons just to thicken it up so that it wasn't running about. Putting a wee bit inside the rudder itself for the rudder shaft, and unfortunately you can't really see it too well here, but right on the end where the sides meet up, just making sure there was a good amount of glue there, epoxy, again just to seal it in at the back. Offer that into place and just line it up, make sure it's nice and flush on both sides, make sure the rudder works freely, and then just allow the epoxy to cure. So again, moving on to the next step, which is attaching the sponsons. Here we've got all the 3D printed parts that we've done. Fantastic. What I've done here, I've just got a wee bit additional information here when it comes to printing some of the components, like the sponsons that will come in a STL file. You'll have the two halves that you can see there. I use Fusion 360 just to, I'm learning, but I'll drop them into the program itself, and then what I can do is I can edit them, basic editing here. I'm certainly not planning to do anything with the design other than separate them. So if I go to the mesh tool, I can go in there, modify the mesh itself, the STLs that Craig's designed, and click separate, and in that way I can save it as two individual pieces. And the reason for that is when it comes to printing them, as you can see there, it's highlighting them in two different parts, so that when I'm using the lightweight PLA, and obviously the amount of stringing that's unavoidable with the lightweight as it's foaming the lightweight PLA, I'll save them as two individual files and then print them as individual pieces. See, I'm just renaming it just to make sure that I'm no overwriting anything, and it's simple for me to get them in and pull them into the slicer and know which part it is that I'm actually printing. So again, just in my 3D files that I've got on the PC, just renaming the rear part, and then save that in the system. Once you've got that, get ready. You know, obviously I use Fusion 360. There will be, and I'm sure there is, other versions of CAD out there, but I don't understand it that well, other than messing about. So as you can see here, you can see the travel lines that will be caused with the print head moving back and forward. And the reason for splitting this is just to remove as much of the travel and the additional pieces that you'll get with the foam expanding, just so it's a nice cleaner print. I tried moving it about in the bed, changing the orientation and things to try and get as little additional lines there that you can see, get them as little as possible, but the best thing to do was just to split it in the slicer. Obviously here with the gap in the centre, we're never going to remove the travel parts there, so there will be additional the wee violet blue coloured lines there. There will be additional parts that needs a wee bit of cleaning, but it's very simple to do. So once you've done that, I've got all the sponsing parts together, and here on the rear part that I saved, the wee sharp blade, just trim it down, and it's very easy to remove. And then just using a small hobby file that I've got, just trimming it in and getting it a wee rough up and removing any of the wee filaments inside. Once you've got that done and you're happy with it, I'm using a wee bit of 6mm foam here just for alignment when I put the CA onto both parts, just to make sure it's nice and flat and it's no squint or anything. Once you've done that to both the sponsons, I'm using about a 5-minute epoxy here and just putting it into the slots, smudging it about to make sure there's a nice even coverage on both parts here. I'm not actually too sure how waterproof lightweight PLA is, but you know, we'll soon find out. So again, just putting a wee bit of foam, 6mm scrap piece of foam in, just so that it holds it upright while the 5-minute epoxy sets and goes off. Next step, moving on to the canards. So like we do, using a wee bit of tape, taping up the presentation side, sliding them into place and just making sure I'm happy with it, with the gaps at both sides. And then using a small amount of epoxy with a wee bit of micro balloons in it. Just be careful not to go too close to the fuselage. A wee bit of additional glue on the outside, just filling up a couple of wee gaps that I had there, and allow that to cure. Once I was happy with that, sliding the sponsons onto the wing. Now the alignment at both ends, which again, great design by Craig, that it'll only go on so far, and when it's on, it should be aligned at both the bottom and the top. Just make sure you push them on as far as you can. A wee bit of Yoo-hoo pour on the wing plate, and then slide it over, and then just with a scrap piece of foam removing any excess glue that's there. So the next step was the EDF unit. Again, I printed everything here in lightweight PLA. Moving on, before we install the EDF itself, I've got a wee 1mm, I think, piano wire with a wee tube. I call it a snake. I don't know the proper name for it, but what I'm doing is just marking that up, attaching it to the rudder servo. Wee Z-bend on one end. I pushed it through the bulkhead there just to support it, so there's very little flex, and then I trimmed it up. However, I should have left a wee bit more on it. It was very neat, but just enough to get onto the control surface itself. So here we've got the FMS 64 unit itself, and got the 3D printed bulkheads on it, and just putting a wee bit of hot glue on it just to secure them in place. Once you're happy with that, just set that to the side and allow it to set. Now here I have the front and the rear. Again, just test fitting the motor itself into the slot, and then aligning up the front part. Just testing it, making sure it all fits pretty well. And then just a wee spot of hot glue around the EDF bulkhead itself. Once that sets, patiently waiting. I'd cut a wee hole in the bottom of the thrust tube as well, just to make sure that the wires fit through. And then again, just sliding the EDF unit into the rear piece. Make sure it's a nice flush fit, so that when I offer up the front, it's nice and flush, and there's trying to get as little gaps as possible. So I was happy with it. And here I'm just using a wee bit of Yoo-hoo pour, sliding that into place. And then offer it up to the fuselage just to see how it fits, and I was quite happy that it met the slots fine. And then just a wee bit of glue on the underside as well, and then just putting on the front piece and then just allowing it to cure, just to make sure it's nice and flat and flush. And a wee tidy up of the wires here before we move on to the next step. The fuselage top, as you can see there, it's suggesting that you fit the EDF unit first. As you can, as I've just shown, I've decided to fit it as a one piece. So I just cut a wee hole, just force a wee hole on the fuselage top itself, so that we can get the rudder control rod through it. Just make sure it's nice and even fit at the front and the back. Let's move the wires away, and then I've got a wee bit of hot glue just securing the sleeve there, and then applying some Yoo-hoo pour to the contact surface, ready for fitting the fuselage top itself. And just tidying the wires out the way, making sure there's some at the back there as well. And then carefully just slide through the rudder cone push rod. We smudge it about, line it up, and then I was fitting the control rod through the linkage stopper, but it was a wee bit tight. There was a wee bit of friction there, which was probably due to the thread lock that I had on it. There's a wee bit more thread lock, it kind of spilled out, but I just put it together anyway, so it probably locked onto the rod itself. So you're just applying a wee bit of hot glue around the ESC itself, so that it's nice and firm against the fuselage top, and again just lining up the bottom. Really, I should have aligned it, put a centre line down it, but in true me fashion, just cut it and stick it together. So here we are, just test fitting the thrust tube itself. Make sure it fits nicely, and I'm thinking about the wiring, just to make sure the wires don't get in the way. Really, I should have measured it and trimmed off as much of the wires. You can see there's a bit extra there. Well, certainly more than it's required, but if we just tidied it up and tucked it underneath, there's a wee bit of space there, so that if there is excess, you can get it away pretty fine. Just cutting a wee bit of relief in the sides here for the EDF bulkheads, just so it's nice and flush fit, so that the wee pegs on the bottom of the EDF bulkhead slot into the hull nice and easily. So a small amount of glue. I'm using again Yoo-hoo pour here around the bulkhead itself. We smudge it about to make sure there's a nice even coating of glue around the front of the intake. And that's just on the bulkhead itself. Now I'm using some CE glue on the thrust tubes itself. So the bulkhead, a bit of Yoo-hoo and some CE on the thrust tube, just to make sure it's nice and tight, good bond, good fit, and hopefully sealed in place. So on the contact surface there, just around, I'm applying a good amount of Yoo-hoo pour. Usually I'm nice and tight with the amount of glue that I'm using, but due to it being on the top, potential water ingress, I'm deciding, just make sure there's a good bit on there. So like the build said, it's the next step was the forward and rear nacelles, the thrust tubes, fitting them together. In the slots for the EDF mount itself, I'm using some hot glue. Offer that up, make sure that's held in place. I'm holding the bottom of it and the top just to force it in and make sure it's nice and tight, and I've got a nice good fit. Again, a centre line would have been beneficial there, because there's every chance I've got the thrust line potentially out, hopefully not, but it might help, you know, some crazy maneuvers. However, if you're building it, I would suggest, you know, put in your center lines on the top of the fuselage panel, just to make sure that it's lined up nice and straight. Obviously the EDF bulkheads will help, but I'm just making sure by squeezing it down. And so the next step's the rudder vanes, again 3D printed. Just offer that up, and a wee bit of CA glue. Get it as nice and flush as possible. It's the same shape, the rudder vane and the rudder arm itself. And then the top, just hook it up to the rudder itself, and then I'm using a wee bit of CA glue just for the top, just to attach it to the rear nacelle. Hold that for a couple of seconds, then that's fine. Just test it to make sure it moves freely, and I was happy with that. Yeah, it was a good bit of movement. So the next step is fitting the stealth nozzles and the vertical stabilizers. Unfortunately, I don't have the stealth nozzles here for this, but with the vertical stabilizers, simple, easy enough, just a small amount of Yoo-hoo in the slots, or epoxy or whatever it is you choose to use. Slide that into place and allow it to set. Next step was to fit the hatch panel. So just using the upper former and a scrap piece of 6mm foam, just cutting it to make sure I can get a wee lip, a wee tooth for attaching it to the front. Small amount of glue, and then set that in place. And then using, I've got a wee bit of foam filler here, just tidying up the ESC area and filling in some of the holes. And then cutting a hole in the magnet panel. I'm only going to use one magnet here. Get some hot glue in the recess that you've just cut. I've got a magnet and I've stuck it to a bit of tape, and then put that in place. Add the other magnet, and then using a pen, just marking it. As you can see, it's transferred a wee mark onto the upper part of the hatch. Remove the magnet and then just cut away the foam. So now that the first magnet's set in place, got a wee bit of tape there that I'm putting over it, just so that when I add this magnet to the top panel, tape it over, slide it in, and then once it sets, I can use the tape just to remove the panel itself. I will put a small aerial in. I've 3D printed a wee aerial type thing. I'm using a wee bit of 5-minute epoxy and just securing it in so that I've got a handle for removing the hatch. So let's see, mix up the epoxy. And just a small amount, it certainly didn't take much at all. I just cut it from the underside, push the wee aerial in and let it set. So that's it for the video, guys. Apologies that I've not included the canopy here. I'm still actually working on the canopy just now. But hopefully you build it, you have some fun. Tobias has mentioned that with the addition of the vertical stabilizer for the EDF, it will perform slightly better. So I will certainly give it a try and post my findings. If you've managed to stay this long, thanks pilots, thanks for tuning in, and I hope that it's helped you if you choose to build the Drake. Thanks again.